Hi everyone, welcome back to another video blog. Thanks for tuning in to my last video called Don't Set Yourself Up for Failure. I think that's what it's called. I don't know. I should have written that down, but I didn't. Anyway, that video, if you haven't watched it, I'll put it in the description on today's video. But it's basically about some things that I see with people who are like really ambitious and trying to tackle their nutrition and their lifestyle and their training. Common mistake is that they don't give themselves enough time to do so. So, they're trying to adopt all this change, but they run out of time in a day to even think about how they're going to do things tomorrow. So I gave you some tips in that video, just how you can maybe manage your time a little bit better. There's some really common time wasters that I see from most people that I speak with. They're usually like television, shopping, online shopping is one of those things too. Just social media, being on chat groups, and a lot of people I meet like spend a lot of time debating stuff on like diet forums, but they're not out there executing things that can help them. So that might be an area that you fall into. There's something I didn't discuss in that video on how you might want to manage your time a little bit better, and it's something that's really important, and I thought it deserved its own video blog. So what I want to talk about is meal prep. Now, a few years ago, it was really, really common that a lot of people that were coming to me for coaching were really trapped in the fast food world, and they were, I would say like 75% of their meals were fast food. And while I still do see that from time to time, the issue I want to talk about today is actually the opposite side of the spectrum, which might surprise some of you. And I find that it tends to be mostly women that fall into this category, but I'm sure the guys out there can relate to this. It's this idea that like every single meal that you make has to be like this epic feast. It has to be this amazing, mind-blowing meal that, you've never had before, and your whole family is just raving about it. It was the best thing that they ever had because it was so different and it was so delicious. And I get it. I know we want to like make everyone happy, and I know it feels good when we make a nice meal and people praise us. But the fact of the matter is if I tried to have like an epic meal like that every single night, there is no way that I would be able to stay on track with my nutrition, have enough time to go to the gym, have enough time to spend with my family and my husband, have enough time to walk the dog, clean the house, do laundry, all those things. So, how I've kind of tackled this is, it's probably something you've heard before, but just in case you haven't, then we're going to go over it. But it's really based on identifying your macronutrients and arranging your meals based on that. So this will work regardless of what your macronutrient breakdown is, whatever diet you're following. I happen to be, a low carber. My diets of choice are carb night and carb backloading. So I'm following a higher fat diet throughout the day, and then at certain evenings and on on carb night, macros are going to be tweaked a little bit. They're not going to be high fat. There's going to be more carbohydrate consumption. But even if you're on a mixed diet or if you're on a low-fat diet, maybe you'll come around and you'll join us here on the high-fat diet side eventually. But until then, the strategy works for whatever your macronutrient plan is. So it's a very simple strategy. Everything's based on my protein for the meal. So I start off with whatever protein I'm going to have. If you're on a higher fat diet, you're probably more likely going to choose cuts of meat with higher fat content, but they don't have to be. You just need to have a general awareness of your portion size, what the macronutrient breakdown approximately is. I'm not out there chasing every single gram like to perfection, because there's absolutely no sense in doing that. We aim for ranges, and you have to be eating in a reasonable range for your goals. So I know, and we'll talk about this in future videos about calories and macronutrients. I know where I need to be for my meals. So I start with my protein serving. If it's a high fat cut of protein, then I probably don't need to add as much fat to that meal. But if it's a lean cut of protein, then I will probably add fat to it. Now, there's a couple of ways I can do that. I can cook my protein in coconut oil or butter or bacon fat, something like that. Or, I try to also make sure with most of my meals that I'm having a handful of leafy green vegetables. So there's another opportunity to add more fat. I can put butter on my broccoli, or, I love cooking Brussels sprouts in bacon fat. So I've got my protein, my leafy greens, my fat will just be adjusted based on, whatever my goal is for that meal. And that's a really great way to do it, because you can do it even when you're having your carby meals, if it's a carb backload or on carb night, where you're just going to not add that extra fat, and you're probably going to increase your carbohydrate intake. So then there'll be a serving of carbohydrate with that meal. So you can see how it's kind of a sliding scale with your fat versus your carbohydrate based on, your strategy for your diet. But the protein and leafy green vegetables are basically your standard for every single meal that you have. Now, let's take one step back here. If you don't understand what I'm talking about at this point, then you need to go do some research. You need to understand macronutrients, and don't feel foolish. There is a lot of people that don't understand what the macronutrients are. I trained a doctor at one point. He's actually a surgeon, and he didn't understand what macronutrients were. And, that was a big eye-opener for me, that I have to make sure that people understand what it is I'm talking about. And I shouldn't assume that everyone does. So if you don't understand what the basic macronutrients are, which are carbohydrates, fat, and protein, then you can start looking online. I do have a page on herfitnesssolutions.com that's dedicated to helping you understand macronutrients. And then the other thing you can do is something that, I've actually done with clients, which is go to the grocery store and just window shop. Start looking at different cuts of meat that you haven't looked at before. Start looking at foods that are not processed. Look at the labeling. You'll start seeing that it's very concise. Like, you'll see protein, fat breakdown, maybe some carbohydrate, and a lot of meat products. You'll see, very little carbohydrate, and just start educating yourself so you can just become familiar with this. And, if you want to do an interesting little experiment in the grocery store, then start looking at the more processed food, and you'll start realizing that that's where things start to become harder to manipulate, because the macronutrients become you'll see like something will be very high fat, very high carb at the same time, and just like a moderate amount of protein. So when you're manipulating your carbs and your fat, it's then easy to see that these high processed food choices kind of become difficult to work with, and they're not ideal. So then that might, once again show you that picking the most unprocessed natural food choices actually make food planning and food prep a lot easier. So, going back to the actual food prep, I batch cook a lot of things. I'll batch cook my protein, I'll batch cook my vegetables. I like to mix up my carbs, so I usually don't batch cook those. It's kind of like, for me, that's the treat that, I get to have after a hard workout. So I kind of just leave that open to what I feel like having that day. And then my fat sources, they're just, they're pretty standard. It's either going to be whatever fat is contained in the cut of meat that I'm having, heavy cream, butter, coconut oil, MCT oil, which I don't use as often. But yeah, it doesn't really need to be much more complicated than that. And then to add variety, what I do is, when it's a weekend and I have more time, I will spend an afternoon investigating some new recipes I want to try, maybe going to the grocery store and finding some new ingredients. You'll see that a lot of low carb cooking requires some special ingredients. So maybe that's not where you want to invest your time, because it's hard to find some of those ingredients. For me, I live in a small town, so some of those things I actually have to order online. And I'm not really a big online shopper, so a lot of my food experiments will sometimes be just on carb night, where I can just be a little bit more creative and, make a lasagna or something like that. But I just try to keep it as simple as possible. So if you can if you can just start planning your meals where you can see your macronutrients on your plate, you can adjust your fat ratio versus your carbs very easily when you have these defined macronutrients on your plate. I just think that that is the best way to tackle it, and you won't be overwhelmed once you get the hang of it. And when you want to add variety, do that when you have time. So I hope this video helped those of you that are struggling with this aspect of dieting. I can tell you right now that a lot of clients that I've worked with that are adopting a new nutrition plan, when they try to overcomplicate things and make these big impressive meals, their heads just start to explode and they just get extremely frustrated. And then when we can, help them simplifize, I don't even know if that's a word, make their meals more simple, that works. It's just much easier for them to wrap their heads around, and it's much easier for them to stick to their plan 7 days a week. So I hope that helps, and I will be back soon with another video blog. Have a good day.